I don't know how to put into words my feelings about Link's Awakening without upsetting the game's fans. I originally played the Game Boy Color version of the game back on the good old 3DS Virtual Console. Whenever I would sit down to play through it, something always stopped me from finishing it. Link's Awakening has not aged gracefully, and the remake doesn't help mitigate the feeling. Don't get me wrong, there are quite a few aspects of the game I enjoy, but it gets watered down by elements carried over from the Game Boy version. Hello, and welcome to Nate's Gaming Lounge, and this is my review of Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. I'm actually not the biggest fan of 2D Zelda games, mainly due to how imprecise the movement options are. Classic Zelda games limit movement to 4 directions, but Link's Awakening allows for 8. Let's compare this game to A Link Between Worlds for a minute. A Link Between Worlds is a remake or reimagining of A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. The game eliminated all of the outdated elements of the game, including the way Link swung his sword and his movement. This makes sense since the player now has the control stick to use. The Link's Awakening remake keeps these limitations of movement to 8 directions. This makes the game feel archaic with today's standards. Using a control stick to move in 8 directions only is awkward, and it's something I couldn't get used to. I would constantly try to make smaller adjustments but take damage instead. Using the D-pad would fix this issue, but there's just one tiny problem. There is no D-pad support in Link's Awakening. This is a baffling decision on the developer's part, especially since the overworld is designed around the limited movement. At least Link's sword swinging is updated, but the movement still makes combat feel awkward. A simple patch would easily fix this issue. This doesn't mean the entirety of Link's Awakening is bad, as a few improvements have been made. For example, the sword and shield are no longer equipable items that use up an item slot. This means you no longer have to constantly pause the game to switch items to attack or guard. The Pegasus boots also do not need to be equipped and makes the overall experience much smoother. One item slot will mostly be used by an item called the Rock Feather. This item allows Link to jump over obstacles or avoid some enemy attacks. The majority of the dungeons keep the Rock Feather in mind and are designed around it. Sadly, they didn't fix when you pick up 2 items exclusive to Link's Awakening called the Power Triangle and Guardian Acorn. I can't stand these items since the prompt always shows up telling you what they do. Yes, I know it gives me an attack and defense boost. I completely forgot after the first time I picked it up. Whatever would I do without you reminding me? While the improvements overall are good, the game still feels extremely outdated as a Zelda game. Of course, it's not the same style as Breath of the Wild, but that's not what makes its age show. A better comparison is A Link Between Worlds, since it set the bar for what 2D Zelda games should be like. It's obvious the design of Koholint Island was built around the Game Boy's limitations. The paths are narrow and the overall size of the island is small. For me personally, there was nothing memorable about the island besides the starting village. It's home to some pretty goofy looking characters and a few locales. Some of these are the grave below the weather vane, the crane minigame, and the fishing hole. The fishing hole is memorable for the wrong reasons though. This doesn't ruin the enjoyment of the game as a whole since it's optional, but many attempts were made here to get the second heart piece. I would get so close, and then the line would just snap. And so would my sanity. Speaking of heart pieces, they were pretty easy to find. This is partially due to the smaller world, but a few of them are just hanging around in the overworld. It makes finding these less special compared to other Zelda games. The other collectible is the seashells. Finding these grants extra rewards based on how many you find, but after getting the heart piece, I just stopped caring. Koholint feels so small that finding these doesn't feel gratifying. Every other Zelda game gives me this feeling, but this game fails to give me the adventurous feeling when exploring the overworld. Link's Awakening is one of the few games I chose not to 100% complete. Nothing reels me in to keep me invested in the adventure. I'll give credit where it's due though, because the dungeon designs are different compared to most other Zeldas. While the game still retains the top-down perspective, there are small sections of 2D side-scrolling. The biggest way the game changes up the dungeons is every item you obtain from a dungeon will most likely be used to solve puzzles in the next one. You will use every tool in your arsenal by the end of the game, whether it's using bombs, arrows, or the Rock Feather. However, this is a double-edged sword in this case. Using all of your equipable items in a dungeon makes them feel somewhat similar to one another. The only standout dungeon because of this is the tower level. This dungeon will have the player navigate through multiple floors to destroy the 4 pillars, keeping the boss room out of your reach. Despite this, I would still say this is an improvement, and it's an element that Breath of the Wild would expand upon. While there are only 9 dungeons total in the game, you can also make your own dungeons via Dampe's dungeon making. When this was first shown off, I was pretty excited for it. It looked like the start of a Zelda Maker-like game. Every dungeon room offered is already pre-made with rooms Link has already adventured through. This does limit creativity, but it's not the main focus of the game. Still, this mode is nothing special. At the end of the day, you're just mixing different rooms together from different dungeons. The biggest blunder of this mode is the fact you cannot share any dungeon you make with players online. You can, however, share this with players locally via the stupid piece of plastic known as Amiibo. And yes, I got the new Link one. This easily kills the mode for me since I don't want to just make and play my own dungeons. The art style the developers used looks amazing. Everything is clay-like, and the way the lighting effects bounce off the overworld really makes the colors pop. There's also a blur effect at the edge of the screen, which gives the illusion the world is larger than it seems. These upgraded visuals give much-needed charm to the island, which is something the Game Boy couldn't do. The animations for enemies and NPCs are given the Zelda touch, and adds much-needed personality to some of them, whether it be Marin singing, Link getting a running start with the Pegasus boots, or Wart singing his lovely song. However, the same can't be said about the character models themselves, specifically the human models. I'm not a big fan of the one-note faces with the soulless black eyes, and I kinda wish they went with an upgraded Link to the Past look, which was shown off in the Dreamer art book and the intro to the game. The enemies also suffer from this, but it's not as noticeable since most of the time they won't be on screen for that long. I get the reasoning is to match the style of the Game Boy version, but it didn't need to be this faithful. The soundtrack also has the same problem. It's not bad, but I expected more out of the remixes for these songs. The OST is pretty much the same compositions with live instruments replacing the 8-bit sounds. I do like the synth-like sounds to some of the songs, and Tall Heights is always great to listen to, and Mabe Village melts my ears whenever I visit. Songs like the Overworld theme could have definitely used a little more oomph to give the game's atmosphere a more adventurous feeling. It's especially noticeable when you listen to the soundtrack from the remake of A Link to the Past on 3DS. It's no secret at this point that Link's Awakening suffers from framerate dips. Framerate drops usually don't bother me unless the dips are drastic. However, the framerate gets cut in half whenever you load into a new area. I am fully aware of the solution of this problem, but the framerate drops still occur even with the fix. These drops happen often enough that it breaks the immersion for me. I would rather have a solid 30 FPS the entire time than trying to target 60 FPS with these framerate issues. I'll give credit where it's due. I like the story of Link's Awakening and how it differentiates itself from other Zelda games. Link is caught in a terrible storm out at sea as lightning strikes his boat and ends up on an unknown island, where a girl named Marin discovers Link unconscious on the beach. As Link explores the area, he's able to find his sword, but is quickly greeted by an owl. The owl tells Link to head to the mysterious forest to the north and get the tail key to enter a dungeon near the village. Upon beating the dungeon, Link finds an instrument locked inside, which he must use to awaken the windfish from his slumber. By collecting all 8 of these special instruments, Link will be able to leave the island. But there is a catch. As Link starts to collect these instruments, he finds out the windfish is having a dream, and everything he's experiencing is part of that dream. They make Link out to be the villain, since awakening the windfish will cause everything on the island to disappear. Link will basically be killing everyone on the island, and I like the direction the game took with it. However, the story makes it hard for me to care about the characters disappearing once the adventure is over. None of the characters stand out at all. The only reason I remember Marin is because she makes multiple appearances, whether it be teaching Link the Ballad of the Windfish or expressing her feelings about leaving the island. It's touching for sure, but that's all the development you get for her character. If Marin and Link had more moments like when they were sitting at the beach, I would have cared more about the island disappearing.
Sleepers wake, dreams will fade.
As a whole, the changes don't improve the overall experience too much. The developers didn't take enough strides to fix some of the core issues Link's Awakening already had. The few smaller tweaks of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess did make a huge difference for me, and the link between worlds went above and beyond. Link's Awakening did the bare minimum. They didn't fix the movement, the overworld map is still narrow and small, and the frame rate constantly dips when exploring the island. But at least you don't have to pause as much, I guess. The game stays faithful to the original, and if that's what you're looking for, then this is the game for you. However, I don't think it's entirely worth it to experience this game again if you already have. I know this game has a following, but for me personally, this is one I wouldn't mind skipping. But what do I know? I'm just some random guy on the internet who decided to review Link's Awakening for the Switch. Do you disagree with what I said? You probably do. Let me know why in the comments below, and if you like this review, subscribe for more gaming reviews.